welcome back again to Brojo Online. Today we're going to be talking about anger. This come up because we noticed, especially in the Facebook group and a few real life conversations that we've been having, that a lot of guys, and this is typical especially for nice guy syndrome, have problems with anger. They have problems with identifying it. They have problems for expressing it. They have problems with what happens when it does come out. And they have problems that they don't realize are linked to anger. Things like depression or massive self-loathing. So we realized, anger itself is one of the emotions we need to address. It's a weird emotion socially. It's one of those emotions in certain cultures. It's about the only emotion a man's allowed to have, to be a man. And yet when he does express anger, he's then told off for doing too much of it. So there's often a mixture of validation and shame attached to anger. You're allowed to be angry, but you're not allowed to be angry. You're not allowed to be any of the emotions but angry. And when you're too angry, then you're too angry. It's a fucking mess out there. And it leads guys to be really repressed with anger, myself included. I really struggled with anger probably more than any other emotion, I think. Embarrassment, that feeling you get when you know you've disappointed someone, those were hard to deal with for me too. But if I look back, I think anger was the worst one. But also it was the emotion that, once I healed my shame with it, I realized that I'd been missing out a lot because I was repressed with that emotion. So my life is, the benefits that I've had from coming to terms with anger are the most measurable out of any of my emotions. I've come to terms with a lot of emotions that I had shame around, sadness, for example. I'm still working on some others like stress. But yeah, anger was a source of so much goodness that I'd been missing out on for so much of my life, particularly in the sense of masculinity. Without anger, it's very hard to live by masculine values, especially things like assertiveness, being able to respect yourself in the face of resistance, setting boundaries, those kinds of things. So that's what we'll be talking about today. We're going to talk about anger. I want you to kind of free your mind, to let go of what you think anger is, or be prepared to let that go, and to bring on a new frame, a new belief around what anger is, what it can or can't do in your life, and basically how to use it properly. So let's have a start by having a look. What is anger? Now, Henry, I can see you on the line there. If you have any thoughts, chuck them in the chat box there around what you think of when the term anger is brought up. Let me start with how I think anger is often perceived, or at least how people who are ashamed of anger perceive it, and how they believe others perceive it. One of the main ones is weakness, ironically. So a lot of people have been raised to believe that if you've got anger, then it indicates some sort of mental weakness, that you've somehow shown that you cannot handle life in some way, that anger, like a child throwing a tantrum in the supermarket, we get raised to believe that our anger is no different to that. That anytime we feel anger, it's like a sign of failure, that we have lost in the situation. Anger is the frustrated consequence of that loss. So quite often people perceive just feeling anger as having failed in some way, especially if you're talking about like a confrontation. If you get enraged or outraged during a confrontation, not only do others perceive you to have lost the battle, but you perceive yourself to have failed. That's often how it's perceived. Rage. quite often people believe that anger and rage are the same thing. So they see somebody who, so for example, somebody who's violent or sexually abusive as a result of anger, or they believe it's a result of anger. They see anger as being the source of violence and harm and destruction. That when someone becomes enraged and vandalizes property or beats someone up or screams and shouts and abuses someone, that's anger's fault, that is anger. And so people often think of anger in its most extremes, and this is why they get scared of even the slightest touch of anger. As soon as they start to feel it, they worry, oh no, what if I kill someone? I remember I used to worry that quite a lot. Because I was obviously with nice guy syndrome, I used to have pukes, as they're called. So about once or twice a year, I'd just blow my stack completely. All the suppressed anger would just pour out in an explosion. Usually while I was alone, I was too scared to let these things happen around other people. But just, I'd have too many frustrations during the course of a week and eventually snap. And I used to become very scared of these pukes because I thought, well, that's anger. If I let this out around somebody else, I might hurt someone. I feel like I could kill someone when I'm in these fits of rage. And I used to work with murderers in Department of Corrections who had never harmed a soul in their life and repressed anger for many, many years in their relationships and then finally just snapped and killed their partner. And that's how I used to think of anger, as this like destructive explosion. So I used to think rage, violence, and anger were all one thing. And loss of control. People often think that anger is a sign that you've somehow mentally lost control. That you're childlike, you're throwing a tantrum, you're no longer stable emotionally. So this is, and there may be others, but this is often where people who are ashamed of anger, this is their beliefs around it. That it's weak, it's rageful and violent, and it's a loss of control. What's interesting is when you actually look again at these descriptions, you'll find that they are a description of behavior, not emotion. And we'll get to that in a second. Henry says, is there any correlation between anger and fear in a deep level? We're going to be talking about that a lot today. I absolutely believe that anger and fear are essentially in a symbiotic relationship. We'll talk about how anger is the power to override fear, and that anger is a protective measure in relation to things that you're afraid of. We'll talk about that. But what happens is when it doubles back and we become afraid of being angry. And that's where the really kind of dangerous stuff happens. So things like violence and rage come from suppressing fear. From suppressing anger, sorry. I'm not going to beat someone up if I just express anger as it arises. I'll only beat someone up if I hold my anger back for a month and then finally snap. And all that month's worth of anger comes out at once. It's too much for me. So if I'm afraid of anger itself, which I think many people are, because they think anger is a source of pain, source of harm and damage, then they suppress it, and then it actually becomes something to be afraid of, because when it does come out, it's horrific. And you get guys like this a lot, like they suppress anger all the time. When it does come out, it scares the shit out of them, and they think that's normal anger. And they don't realize, we saw this in the Facebook group with guys talking, was that, I think one guy was saying how he'd walk down the street and he's almost looking for a fight. He wants to, he wants to hurt somebody. And he's scared of that feeling. And he thinks that's just normal anger. What I'm going to be talking about today is that is the consequence of not expressing anger. That's the build-up of anger. Any emotion that builds up becomes essentially poisonous. I can think of a mental experiment. Any emotion, if you suppress it with shame, eventually it becomes dangerous. Sadness and anger can both lead to depression if you suppress them. Fear, if it's suppressed, can lead to chronic anxiety. There's a lot of things that, a lot of emotions, if you don't let them out when they come up, they get stored and they kind of rot. They have a use by date, emotions. you have to release them very quickly after they arise, or otherwise they start kind of going off and they start to decompose, but they don't go away. They just turn into something else. Violence, anger turns into violence and rage. Sadness can turn into depression. Fear can turn into chronic anxiety, panic attacks. This is what you often find. I work with, say, a lot of people who have panic attacks, and I can always find huge amounts of dishonesty about fear. So the reason they have panic attacks, it's pretty reasonable to assume, is because they're not expressing fear when it comes up, and it builds. And the same with anger. Anger and fear together create a really kind of toxic soup if they're not released appropriately. And today we're going to be talking about releasing it appropriately. So fear is actually a trigger for anger, but then anger can be a trigger for fear if you're ashamed of it, and it goes backwards and it loops on itself. So you just go afraid, angry, never releasing anything. I want to set a precedent with you guys. I want to talk about a new way to look at anger. Especially, I want you to let go of the idea that it's bad or wrong, that anger is somehow failure, that it's an emotional weakness, that somehow a fully enlightened great person would never experience anger, that confidence and anger don't go together. I want you to let go of all of those ideas. There's a term that I give to anger that helped me with this. I stopped calling it bad or wrong or failure, and I started calling it the dark emotion. I think of it kind of like if I have an army, my emotions are a team, like an army, then anger is my assassin. The rest of the team's a little bit scared of him because he's very powerful and he's very dangerous, but he's also one of the most productive, one of those most productive emotions. You need anger to protect the rest of the team. It's a dark horse, but an absolutely necessary one. And that's one of the things I want to help you reframe anger from this thing that does destruction in your life through to this kind of protective, dark, powerful force. Think of anger as the thing that's going to help you fight off a lion. It's the thing that's going to help you protect your family when somebody breaks into the house. It's the thing that's going to override a fear that's become restrictive. Fear can be very helpful. Fear can stop you from crossing the road when there's too many cars. But once you're already on the road and a car's coming, fear is no longer helpful. Fear will freeze you. Whereas anger will make you jump. Anger will get you out of the way of that car. Anger is this powerful heat, this absolute rush of adrenaline and warmth, and literally is heat that warms up all your muscles. Anger can give you a warm up like 15 minutes at the gym. It can make you instantly hot enough to deal with anything, all muscles engaged. And you can see the difference between, say, like if someone gets into a bar fight, the person who gets scared more than they get angry is going to get their ass kicked. But the person who goes from scared to angry can usually fight their way out of it. And that's what I want you to think of. If you suppress anger, then there's nothing to override fear when an override is required. None of the other emotions override fear. They all have to wait for fear to finish. It's only anger that can turn fear off and replace it with passion and heat and power and motivation. But if you spend a whole lifetime suppressing anger because you're afraid of it, then you'll be missing out on power. You'll be missing out on masculinity, missing out on passion, missing out on heat, missing out on courage. Those are all states that are propelled by anger. And that's what I noticed most in my own life is when I looked at what was missing from my life, it was all things that required anger. I was missing passion in my job. Right? That's an angry emotion. Passion isn't happiness. Passion is drive. Passion isn't pleasure. It's heat. I was missing assertiveness, boundary setting. I'd never stood up for myself. I never went for what I wanted. I didn't say what I really thought because I was too afraid. I didn't have an override that required like, nah, fuck it, you need to say this. I didn't have that, nah, fuck it, do it. I didn't have that click that was so needed in so many situations that if I didn't have it, I missed out. And I could see that I missed out. I missed out on dates. I missed out on job opportunities. I missed out on stopping a bully. You know, I missed out on setting boundaries with people that would have made the relationship a lot healthier in the future. I missed out on taking a risk and going for what I wanted because I didn't have that click that went, nah, fuck it, do it. You better fucking do it. That kind of inner coach, that aggressive like drill sergeant say, drop, cut your bullshit, get on with it. I'm not saying fear is unhelpful always, but there comes a time where fear is just doing its job and it's not actually helping anymore. It's just stopping you from doing something that's even more beneficial but scary. Coming back to Henry's question before, for me, that is the main link that most people miss out on, is if you don't have anger, then fear rules you completely. If you can't express anger. But what will happen is because fear rules you, you'll get so many frustrations built up around missed opportunities. God, I should have asked her out. I should have told my boss to go fuck himself. I should have done this. I should have done that. A year's worth of that and you snap. Then anger comes out. But it's a year's worth of anger that's been rotting on the shelf. It's sick anger. It's rage and depression and loathing and hatred. Not fresh, bright, pure anger, which is just heat and power. It's old, weary, sick, fucked up anger. And when that comes out, it's so terrifying that you never want to see it again. And so you start suppressing anger again. And you get stuck in this loop where anger's getting the blame for your fucked up behavior. But it was the suppression of anger that caused the fucked up behavior. And that's the loop we get trapped in with anger. Henry's got a question here. Dated BPD, bipolar disorder? No, bipolar or borderline personality? She said she had a fear of a borderline, right? She had a fear of abandonment, but she often got mad for no reason and she pushed me away. Why do you think that is? Okay, yeah. Borderline and fear of abandonment, it's more of a personality thing here. So one of the things around borderline is this constant fear and certainty that nobody actually will ever like you. And quite often they will push people away or cause dramas with people as a way of self-protection. So if I keep you at a distance, you can't hurt me. You can't abandon me. You can't get deep enough to hurt me. But also quite often borderlines are just, especially if they haven't received proper treatment, like dialectical behavioral therapy, they just have a compulsion to cause drama. They can't stop themselves. It's a way of kind of showing themselves that they have an impact on the world, kind of fucked up way. Like if they cause a drama, they can see, I matter. I have an influence. And pushing people away, teasing people, playing mind games. This is all very common for borderlines. Getting mad for no reason. It could be that she genuinely was angry, or it could be part of a kind of performance to play mind games. What I would say is trying to have a relationship with a borderline, it's not impossible, but it's one of the most difficult relationships a person could ever have. Of all the kind of personality types and disorders there are out there, even psychopaths have a better time connecting with people often than borderlines do. Okay, doesn't mean it's impossible for them, but they have to get treatment and training and support. It's like working with something that is the opposite of warm social connection. They have a compulsion that does the opposite. So, yeah, it's worth researching, by the way. If you ever get into a situation with a borderline, it can absolutely rule your life. You'll just become obsessed with a person. You don't know why. They're not even that great. But if you research the principles of borderline, you'll come to understand why that happens. Some of the most difficult people I've ever managed in my life in corrections were the borderline cases. They just did my head in, It doesn't mean they're bad people. It's just most of them are untreated, and it's an area of psychology that most psychologists are still scratching their head, and Don't know what the fuck to do with these people. They just don't have anything that works very well. But they got some stuff that sort of works. Coming back to anger, anger is motivation. Quite often, I think people mistake motivation as being a pleasurable experience. Like motivation is a happiness of some kind. And yet, when has happiness ever made you want to do something uncomfortable? When has happiness ever pushed you beyond what you're already doing? Motivation is not a happy feeling, it's an angry feeling. It's a frustration. It's a fuck this needs to change. That's anger. A lot of people wonder, like, why do I like self-sabotage? Why am I stuck? Why won't I, get my ass to the gym? Or why don't I finally go for that promotion? Because you're not angry enough. Your situation doesn't piss you off enough. Or you're not allowing yourself to be pissed off about it. One of my favorite things to do while journaling, is to write about the things that annoy me. The more I write about them, the more annoyed I get. The more annoyed I get, the less afraid I get. Or eventually I go, I don't give a fuck what happens, I'm fixing this. And then I get into it. But when I was ashamed of anger, I wouldn't allow that build up. I'd always talk myself out of anger. I'd say, you know what, it's just the way of the world. It's, who am I to complain? I'm a lucky guy. I should stop being a pussy and just get on with it. And because I did that, I never actually got mad enough to do anything about it. All of those little excuses in my head to suppress anger was just fear talking. It was fear and shame. It was talking me out of being angry because I thought anger was bad. But the idea that anger is bad is a complete illusion. It's not anger that's bad. It's reacting in an unhelpful way to anger that can be bad. When I'm violent, when I throw a tantrum, where I scream and shout, where I get, self-loathing and depression, that's a reaction to anger. That's not anger itself. Anger can't get the blame for that. One of the ways you can sort of realize that is there's people out there who are angry and they don't do any of that stuff. There's somebody who can get angry with their kids, but they don't hit the kid or yell at them. So hitting and yelling is not necessarily anger. It's a loss of control over anger. And that only comes when anger is too big to control. When is anger too big to control? When you suppress it and it all comes out at once. A day's worth of anger you can handle. A month's worth, a year's worth, all coming out at the same time. No human being on the planet can handle that much emotion. And yet that's not the reason, anger is not the reason why you do fucked up things. It's because too much anger at once comes out. If you let it out every time it came up, it would only be a small, manageable amount. And I think one of the biggest losses that people experience with anger, if they don't allow them to, is they lose meaning. How are you supposed to know what's important, what you stand for, if you're not allowed to get angry? Anger is your counter-argument. It shows you what makes you unhappy. It shows you what you don't like. And that is by far probably the most important principle for figuring out what's meaningful to you, what matters. So many of the guys I talk to, especially nice guys, the biggest tragedy of being a nice guy is one day you kind of wake up and you go, who the fuck am I? What am I doing with my life? Like, why do I even exist? It's this really existential, very painful feeling. So what's the point of all this? Now, you're only going to have that question if you don't have anger. Anger always tells you what the point is. Anger always says, fuck that shit. None of that. Stop that. Hate that. That gives you your boundaries. It's like, if I don't like that stuff, then everything that remains is what's meaningful to me. If someone attacks my family and that makes me mad, that means my family is meaningful to me. It tells me what's meaningful. If my boss disrespects me and I get heat in my chest, it tells me that self-respect is meaningful to me. But if I've suppressed that emotion, I lose track of what I care about. And that's a real common complaint around nice guys and others who suppress anger is they don't really know what they stand for. They don't feel passionate about anything. They might have some principles, but they've just taken it from others. They don't have something that they really stand up for because they believe it, And I'm telling you, anger is what's missing. Healthy anger. One of the biggest things that changed in my life is when I started letting anger come out, which we'll talk about near the end, how to do that, is suddenly it became very clear to me what I care about. And that was such, oh, fuck, that felt so good. Like, now life has meaning. I know what I care about now. I know what I hate. I know what I love. I know the difference between those two now. When I get into an argument with someone, I know what position I'm taking. I'm not just like, oh yeah, I can see both sides of the story, you know, everybody's right, there's no such thing as truth. I didn't have that anymore, that nice guy bullshit. I was like, you know what, you're wrong and you're right. And that's very clear to me because what you say pisses me off and what you say doesn't piss me off. So I know who I agree with here. Anger helped me with that, you know. Another thing from Henry. Triggered listening to the podcast about the dark truth of pickup. Yeah, pickup's got a lot of stuff to do with anger involved. Took away my belief. It seems anger came from feeling lost, not fear, not frustration. What are your thoughts? Henry, do you mind if I bring you up for a conversation? Is that cool? You can say no if you want. Okay, excellent. Let me just unmute you there. All right, Brian, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Excellent. So tell me a bit more about what you've written here. Help me understand.
The reason why I came to Broju because I got frustrated because I got dumped by my girlfriend, and then somehow I just thought if I join Broju, maybe it's some kind of like pickup community, but in a better way. And then along the way, it's sort of like changed the whole perspective of pickup altogether. It's no more manipulation, but it's more like honesty and integrity. But when I listened to your podcast recently, it sort of like remind me of my dark past, of my old PUA, still there. And then one thing that really blew my mind was when John Cooper said like even those pickup gurus, they just talk bullshit, but they didn't even get laid. And I thought like, oh fuck, really? So I've been tricked by these guys, and then I don't even know if you're actually telling me the truth or not. So I don't know if the podcast actually the truth, or maybe those pickup gurus are the truth. So yeah, somehow just like I'm feeling angry. Like, who I have to believe now? Do I have to believe those pickup gurus, or do I have to believe you and John Cooper? But yeah, well, at the moment, I feel like I'm leaning towards honesty and integrity. And then I think so far it makes me happier somehow, even though I don't actually get laid as much. But yeah, it really triggered my emotion when I feel like I got lost. Who I have to believe, you or the PUA? Yeah.
Well, I'd suggest that the best possible outcome in the end is that you don't have to believe any of us because you've made up your own mind about something, you know. But what's interesting is what you're bringing up. I mean, anger is a lot of what brings people into pickup. And one of the reasons for that, I talked about on the podcast, I guess one of the more controversial things I've said is that the whole pickup stuff is very similar to grooming by pedophiles. They follow very similar techniques and methods. And that's one of the things that first bothered me about doing it. I didn't want to be a fucking sex offender, But one of the things that stands out about when you work with child sex offenders is there's a risk factor you have to measure with them called sex as coping. And that is if you're working with rehabilitating a sex offender and they start to use sex as a coping mechanism for anger and stress, it's a big warning sign that they're about to reoffend. Okay, it's one of the worst ones. So if a guy starts masturbating a lot or using hookers or even sex with a partner because he's angry and stressed, it means he's getting into a really fucked up mindset. Now, this is where pickup comes in because a lot of pickup is like a coping mechanism for self-loathing and rage. The guys who either have anger towards themselves or towards women or both, And I don't mean healthy anger. I mean that built up, pent up, fucked up anger. They're actually looking for release through sex. And in psychiatry terms or psychology terms, this is a huge warning sign for what we could simply call a very unhealthy mindset. Using sex as a coping mechanism basically doesn't take people to very good places in the long run. So what I like about what you've said is, you have a lot of anger built up, and fucking a bunch of girls isn't going to help with that. In fact, it's only going to continue a system of building up anger. Now, I'm not saying that sex is bad by any means, but sex is not the cure to anger, because anger is not a disease. Sex will not take away the rage and self-loathing and hate and frustration, because those aren't caused by lack of sex. They're caused by lack of emotional expression when it comes to anger. Put it this way, you got to ask, do you want to hate fuck everybody, or do you want to have sex that you actually enjoy? Do you want to have sex that's a pleasurable experience rather than a release of rage? And if that's the case, then sex is not going to be the resolution for anger problems. In fact, it's only going to feed them more, because it's kind of like taking a drug to get rid of anger. Eventually you're going to have to take more and more of the drug. And this is how sex addiction often begins. You'll find underneath the surface of most sex addicts is rage. And there's definitely under the surface of all rapists that I ever worked with. I worked with a lot of serial rapists and sex offenders, and underneath their offending was just burning rage, often kind of misogynistic rage. They hated all women, or they hated their mother or something. And quite often self-loathing. They hated themselves. And they thought, well, fuck you then, I'll take it out on the world. And this is what I saw more in violent than sexual offenders. Sexual offenders is often hatred towards women. With violent offenders, is often hatred towards themselves or society as a whole. But what they all had in common was it's often, like I used to work with a lot of guys who beat up their partners. And it looked like they couldn't handle their anger at all. As soon as they got angry, it's just Jake the Muss, like smashing their partners. But the truth is, I worked with literally thousands of these guys. And what you'd find is they were actually holding their anger back all week long. They don't just lose it as soon as they feel anger. Most of the time, they're actually trying to hold their anger in. They just explode because there's so much of it. They're traumatized from childhood. They've got years worth of suppressed anger built up. And, their boss yells at them and they hold it in. They get home and dinner's not ready and they hold it in. They hold it in, they get to Friday night, they have a drink, boom, they explode and bash their missus. Now on the surface, it looks like this guy, as soon as he gets angry, he hurts people. But it's not the case. He's actually been doing very fucking hard work trying not to hurt people. But he just doesn't, like Henry just said, he doesn't let it out. He doesn't let it out when it happens because he's scared of it. Because every time it seems to come out, it beats up his partner. He thinks that's his anger. You get the same thing with rapists and sex offenders. When they finally lose their shit, they go and do a horrific thing that gives them 8 years in jail. They become very scared of getting angry again. The last time I got angry, I raped four girls. I can never get angry again. And the suppression begins. They don't realize, and this is what most of the therapy is about for sex offenders, let it out. Not just anger, but all the emotions that they're uncomfortable with. Anxiety, fear, sadness, disgust. Because they don't let that stuff out, it sits and it rots. And then when it comes out, it's something horrific. But it's not its natural form. And that's a key thing, like you identified before, Henry. Fear can trigger off anger. That can be a natural, very helpful process. I'm too afraid now, it's time to get angry. Fuck this shit, let's do something about it. But if you then reverse and go, oh, but now I'm afraid of doing something about it, you start creating this, I call it like a toxic soup of emotion. Fear triggering anger, triggering fear, none of it coming out. All of it just like fucking frying your brain. And so on the surface, you're sitting there like this, looking calm as, and inside you're just having this war. You ever felt it like you're in a weird situation, like a team meeting, and you probably look calm as, but inside you're a fucking mess. And it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And then later on, you wonder, like, why do I always binge drink every weekend? Or why do I drive so fast sometimes? Or, why do I scream at my parents? It doesn't make sense, this weird, destructive behaviors I do. Well, it'll make a lot of sense when you go, how much anger did I suppress this week? Then you see where that problem comes from. Probably because I picked up on this pattern pretty quickly. But I was getting into like real trouble. I was getting kicked out of nightclubs for bad behavior and stuff like that. And I wasn't being a douche exactly. I was just kind of nudging people and kind of doing this really reckless behavior. I was doing a bit of drink driving at the time as well, doing all sorts of things that were really dangerous and bad for me. Lots of drugs. And then I came to click. I'm like, what I'm seeing is what happens when my barriers come down. And that is just this release of anger. Now, why would that happen when I drink? When I disinhibit myself, why would anger come out? Because it's waiting to come out. Because it's not coming out the rest of the time. And that's when I realized something's up here. I spent my whole life suppressing anger, and yet as soon as I bring the barriers down, anger pours out. Something's wrong. I'm not dealing with anger properly. And that began the journey for me. I'm like, if I don't do something about my anger, I'm going to get killed or I'm going to kill somebody. And I don't want that to happen. What it took me a much longer time to realize was that there was no cure to anger. There was no way to get rid of it. I was constantly going to get it. And the fact that I saw it as bad and unhelpful was the problem. Anger itself was fine. It was the way I viewed anger that was hurting me. Why do we get angry? Where does anger come from? What triggers it? What's the point of it? I want you guys to ask yourself this question with fresh ears, fresh eyes, whatever, fresh mind. Imagine if for a second the anger wasn't wrong or bad, but in fact necessary. That anger was, like all emotions, totally helpful, totally necessary, and required for a richer, meaningful life. Imagine, just play like devil's advocate. Imagine that's true. If that was the case, if there was a God and he was designing humans and he decided, I've got to give them anger, why did he do that? What's the point? Now, often we perceive anger as being a loss of control, like anger is a mistake. It means you're too sensitive and easily set off. It means you're too aggressive, that you're a dominant alpha wannabe douchebag that uses anger to like throw his weight around. Or it means you can't control yourself. Anger is a sign that you've got some sort of mental weakness, that when you get emotional, you lose control. Somehow other people are better at controlling themselves. So often that's what we think. We get anger simply because we're weak in some way. Anger is like a byproduct of not being strong enough, and that if we were strong enough, there would be no anger. And there are even some philosophical schools that seem to promote this idea. One of the things I used to have a problem with Stoicism, for example, was I constantly talked about anger as if it was wrong, a mistake, something bad. Same with Buddhism. Anger is something you've got to let go of and dissolve, detach from. There's constantly this theme that anger is like some sort of evolutionary fuck up. That when it comes, you just have to like kind of get rid of it. It's like some waste product. There's so many, especially the more spiritual types, those really sort of douchey types. They'll talk about anger being some sort of failure. Like if you're angry, you're unenlightened. If that is the case, why, after 150,000 years of human evolution, and that's just for Homo sapiens, why do we still have anger if it is such a mistake? Why does it exist? Henry asks, how do you release anger and fear, that circling complication, the toxic soup, if you're afraid to discuss it to anyone? We'll get to that to the end. I don't know if, Henry, if you'll be able to stay to the end, but the recording will have it. And at the end, we're going to talk about the how-to practical application here. But particularly, that's the question I'm going to be answering. I'm building up to it with my typical fashion. Let's look at anger in a different way. Let's imagine that you've always been wrong about anger, and that a lot of people are wrong about anger. That anger isn't bad. That anger isn't a mistake. That anger is actually a helpful, necessary, very purposeful emotional state designed for specific tasks. Let's have a look at some of those. Courage. Anger is the override for fear. When fear is being too restrictive, anger steps in. Fear is what keeps you backing away from the lion so that you don't get attacked. But when the lion attacks, anger is what kicks in to give you a fighting chance, because fear is no longer going to help. Fear is what keeps you careful at the party so that you don't set off the big drunken douchebag. But once he's set off and it's too late, anger kicks in to give you a fighting chance. Fear is what keeps you in a respectful kind of diplomacy with your boss. You don't say every raging thought that comes into your head and throw your job down the toilet. But anger is what kicks in when your boss crosses the line and starts bullying you. Anger is there to override fear when fear is no longer being helpful. Really, when you think about it, what other emotion overrides fear? There are plenty that do, in a sense, like you can override fear with acceptance. But acceptance won't set boundaries with your boss. Acceptance won't protect you from the lion or the douchebag at the bar. Acceptance will just make you lie there and take it, which doesn't help you in the long run. The idea that you have to just accept everything that pisses you off is an illusion. If you did that, you would die very quickly. You'd get eaten alive by this world. In real world times, if you were just sitting there going, you know what, everything is all good all the time, you're going to get shit on every day. And you better believe that no matter how enlightened and spiritual you are, that's going to build up and you're going to lose your shit. People wonder why these cult leaders that lead these spiritual cults end up becoming pedophiles. So, courage is absolutely an angry sensation. Cool. Henry, you're off now? Yep, I'll send you the link for the recording, mate. Thanks for joining in. Enjoy your zook. It also identifies boundaries. Anger is what tells you what you like and what you don't like. What the threats are, what the problems in your life are. That heat you get when you notice something, that frustration, annoyance, whatever you want to call it, it's all anger. And it's all saying, you know what, I don't like this. Like we mentioned before, that also gives you a pretty good idea of what you do like, because it's the opposite of what you don't, isn't it? Most of the time. It's funny, one thing I've noticed, and this just anecdotally, the angriest people in my world, the people who are kind of constantly angry, are very unlikely to say that I don't know what the meaning of life is. Interesting. Whereas the most quietest and kind of non-controversial people are often filled with existential dread. They don't know why they're here. Anger, it's like something to fight. If you have an enemy, being a soldier makes sense to you. If you don't, being a soldier seems like a waste of time. So it's the idea that anger identifies your boundaries of what you like, don't like, what's a threat to you, what problems you want to fix. It identifies all problems, but from that you'll be able to figure out which ones you want to fix and which ones you can fix, and that will give you meaning of life. I mean, essentially, I believe the meaning of life is just finding better problems to fix. Anger tells you what the problems are. Anger also identifies long-term unresolved issues, trauma. If there's something that constantly makes you angry, even though on paper it doesn't make sense to get angry about it, like a traffic jam, or somebody behaving in a feminine way, or somebody disagreeing with you, if these things really set you off, make you lose your shit, anger's telling you you've got some unresolved issues. Anger's telling you to go see a coach or a therapist. Anger's telling you that you've got some shit that you're still stuck in childhood in your mind, and you need to get that sorted. So anger is the drive for values of respect, courage, determination, and responsibility. Anger makes you set boundaries, stand up for what you believe in, respect yourself, Fix the problems you can be fixed. That's responsibility. Get through the hard times by being pissed off that they're hard. Anger does all of that. And without anger, you don't do those things. Without anger, your boundaries get shit on. Threats grow. Problems accumulate. Life gets stagnant because you're not moving forward. Now, what struggles do we have with anger? Well, we get unsure on how to express it. Because we're ashamed of it, we're not sure how to get it out. Because by the time we go to get it out, it's usually built up and it's complicated. We're not even sure what we're angry about anymore, because we're angry about 60 different things over time. So we get scared of expressing it, we get scared of its power, and we suppress it. And when we suppress it, we're either going to get a destructive release of anger, an explosion or a puke, or we're going to get an implosion, self-loathing, self-harm, depression, suicide. We believe that anger is associated with all this pain and suffering, but it's the repression of anger that causes all that pain and suffering. Normal anger helps you out if you just let it. But there's a lot of shaming of anger that we need to acknowledge in public. We're judged by others. They try to calm us down. As soon as you show anger, people are like, it's all right, just relax, as if you've done something wrong just by feeling it. One of the things you'll need to understand is that for you to be able to express anger properly, you're going to be surrounded by people who are also ashamed of anger, and they're just wrong. You can't listen to them. They might be able to give you feedback on whether your expression of anger is healthy, whether it's helpful, whether it's causing harm and destruction or not, but they cannot give you feedback on whether or not you should feel anger. They will, though. They'll tell you so often, calm down, relax, it's not a big deal, don't get your knickers in a twist, all right, mate, take it easy. All they're really saying is, I'm ashamed of anger, please don't do it in front of me. And you can't be listening to them, or you're going to get back into this trap, this cycle of being afraid of anger, which anger is the only thing that can help you out of, but of course you get looped. These destructive releases of anger, I want you to think back to your life of how many times you built up anger over multiple aggravations and frustrations, trying to talk yourself out of it, pretending you weren't pissed off or disappointed or frustrated or annoyed by something. And then the explosion that came, the victim mindset, I've been harmed, followed by vengeance and retribution. Where you've done things that you're just so not proud of. Where you've hurt people intentionally, even though you tell yourself, I'd never hurt someone. Violence, assault, damaging property, hurting people that you love. Or internal abuse, self-harm, like drug abuse. Feelings of depression, anxiety, self-loathing. Depriving yourself of good things as a punishment. That's all repressed anger. So, let's look at healthy ways to express it. Let's imagine that anger is a helpful, healthy, necessary emotion, and you want it to help your life. It can be a long, slow journey for some people. It was for me, certainly. To this day, I'm still doing pieces of work on anger for myself. But it can start simply. First off, I think the first exercise I'd give you guys to do is to write down a complete brainstorm as much as you can think of. How do you know when you're angry? What are the warning signs? What are the symptoms? I don't want to say symptoms because it's like an illness. But what are the kind of things that you see in yourself in terms of feelings, thoughts, even behavior that tell you that you're angry? And when I say anger, I also mean frustrated, annoyed, disappointed, upset. You'll have different words for it simply because of shame. You don't want to call it anger, but it always is anger. Frustration is just anger. Okay? It's like a little bit of anger. Annoyance is a little bit of anger. They're all just anger. Okay? Boundaries have been crossed. Problems aren't being fixed. So I want you to look at the signs, and what you'll be looking for is not just classic signs of anger, like tense muscles, heat in your chest, thoughts like I need to fix this or stop it or cross my boundaries, but also the signs of shameful anger. One of those would be when you're talking yourself out of being angry. You're saying, look, I shouldn't be upset by this because of rationale, right? Trying to calm down other people who are angry so that they don't set you off. That's a warning sign that you're angry. Avoiding a situation because it annoys you, that's a warning sign that you're already angry. Just the thought of that situation is making you angry and you're trying to get out of it. You know, being sensitive and picky and irritable, little things pissing you off. It's a sign you're angry about a bigger thing that you're not dealing with. Really take the time. This could heal your whole life, so make it a priority. Get a fucking piece of paper out and write down everything that shows you when you're angry. Everything that might be a sign that you're pissed off. Physical sensations, thoughts, beliefs, behavioral patterns, anything you can think of, and keep adding to this list as you observe yourself over time. In your journaling, go, you know what? Today I realized that me binge eating is a sign that I'm angry. Me binging on drugs on the weekend is a sign that I'm angry. Me watching heaps of Netflix after work is a sign that I had a bad day at work. These are all signs that I'm angry and I'm not dealing with it. I'm not expressing it. I'm trying to push it down, avoid it. Porn, huge warning sign. Sexual release is coping. Like we said before, if you use sex as a way to cope with sort of aggressive feelings, you're not dealing with anger properly. One of the first steps is, once you can know these signs, is when they come up, say it. You don't have to be a poet here. Just say, I'm angry. Say it to yourself if no one else is around. Just acknowledge the anger. That's like 50% of the battle. Most of your healing will come from that. Just when you're angry, call it what it is, anger. It's not frustration, it's not annoyance, it's not disappointment. It's not, oh, well, things are the way that, it's anger. You don't accept things. You're not tolerating shit. You're not handling life well. You're angry. And that's fine. Just be angry. You can say I'm angry. You don't have to punch a hole in the wall. You don't have to scream at your partner. You don't have to fucking, I don't know. You don't have to cause any form of harm or destruction. Just say I'm angry. It's not harmful to do that. If someone's harmed by you doing that, that's their problem, because saying I'm angry is not an objectively harmful thing to do. If someone else is like, oh, you scare me when you say that, it's like, well, you've got some fear issues you need to work on. That's not my problem. Now, if they're scared of you for being angry because you punch them, sure, fair enough. Or that even if you shout, fair enough. But if you're just saying as calmly as possible, look, I'm angry right now, I can feel it. When you said that thing before, I instantly got angry. Avoid the temptation to say, because you did that thing, I'm angry. No, you don't know that. You might be angry from childhood trauma that you can't even remember. You don't know why you're angry. You just know that you are angry. That's the only thing you can comment on. So just say, I am angry. I'm feeling anger right now. As soon as that happened, I got frustrated. Not that made me frustrated. I got frustrated in reaction to that thing. That thing might be neutral. I'm the person who got frustrated. I'm the person who got angry. For some reason, when I see that, I get annoyed. Doesn't mean that that thing's annoying. It just means I get annoyed when I see it. Just start talking about your anger, even if it's only to yourself. Don't deny to yourself that you're angry, because that's most of your denial. You pretend that you're not angry to yourself. Show yourself and others that you're angry. You can even say, look, I've got to walk out. For some reason, I'm feeling really angry right now. I'll come back to you guys. Walk out. Seriously, nobody can fire you for doing that. If someone breaks up with you because you did that, that's a shitty partner. If a friend doesn't want to call you back because you got angry, fuck that friend. I don't mean literally. I mean, fuck them. They're no longer in your life. Let anger exist. That will do most of the healing work in terms of stopping you from suppressing and building up. Seriously, if that's all you did, just said, I am angry, at least you're not going to have these pukes and depression and panic attacks anymore, right? Now let's have a look at how to use anger. Anger is for courage, passion, determination, responsibility. When you're feeling anger, some things you can do. One is look for a creative project that requires more motivation and aggression. It could even be something just like going to the gym. Maybe you've been slacking off and going to the gym for a while, and then something pisses you off. Ride that wave. You're like, fuck this, I'm fucking going to the gym. I'm going to go do some fucking pull-ups. Go do it. Turn that anger into physical energy. You won't be angry by the end of your session, guaranteed, because you'll have used the power for what it's for. This is a great sort of more of a temporary training step. If you don't know why you're angry, then just assume it should be used physically. And I don't mean punching stuff. I don't mean cathartic kind of associating anger with violence. But I mean something creatively physical. Build something. Fix something. Look around the house, see what's broken and fix it. Go to the gym and build your muscles. Write that book or that journal entry that you've been meaning to write. Put the anger into a creative project. Start to link anger with creativity rather than destruction. You can choose this anytime. You really can. But you can't do it if you don't first go, yes, I'm angry, and acknowledge it and give it the respect that it deserves. The next level up from that is often the reason you're angry is something you can probably stand up to. There is probably a problem that you're pissed off about, a cause that you can stand for. Now, this could just be yourself. This could just mean having a confrontation with someone. The way you speak to me, fuck, I don't like it. And you can use the beard model and other things that we've got in the Brojo content to deliver this. But being anger, it's a temporary burst of courage. Use it. If there's something you're afraid of, have a list, Have a list of the things you're afraid of that need to be done. And next time you're angry, go, right, what's something on this list I can do? Quick, while I'm still angry. And go knock it off the list. Use anger as a source of power for those things that you're usually too afraid to do. Particularly look for the link, the thing that you're actually angry about and also scared of. Wait for that point where you're more angry than scared, then go act on it. You might spend most of your time scared of your boss's bullying behavior, then one day you're like, fuck, I'm sick of him doing that. Now's your chance. Tell yourself, you know what, I'm angry. I've had enough. Fuck this. And go knock on his door. Trev, can we have a talk, mate? There's something I really got to say. You'll be scared that you're just going to go, rah, 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 rah. But that's why we have these other tools and resources in Brojo. You'll be able to plan out what you're going to say carefully before you say it, so that you don't throw your job down the toilet, but you still stand up for yourself respectfully. And if you're not directly sure where the anger is coming from, you can just solve any scary problem, tackle anything that terrifies you, anything that's on your list that you wish you had done but you're too scared to do. If you feel the anger, go, right, now's the time to do one of the things on that list. And in the longer term, you can start looking for root causes of anger, a more therapeutic approach where you look below why you think you're angry to the kind of real content. So, for example, if I get angry during traffic jams, then the real thing I'm asking myself is, why does being stuck still piss me off so much? Do I also get angry in queues? Do I get angry in any time where I have to wait for what I want? Is that my problem? Now, where does that come from? Why does that bother me? Because this is more the acceptance work. There might be some triggers to anger you have that come from inaccurate beliefs. You're angry about something that's not real. For example, if you're angry that the world is unfair, well, that's a lack of acceptance. Of course the world's unfair. It always has been, always will be. It's not something getting angry about is going to be particularly productive. But you can get angry about the unfair things that you can do something about. So rather than getting angry that the world's unfair, you can go, I'm going to get angry about child sex trafficking. I'm going to start a voluntary organization that tries to reduce it. That's a good use of anger. But just sitting there fuming about how much the world sucks, it's not a great use of anger. Anger, it's like fear is unhelpful if the attack actually comes. It's time for anger. Anger is unhelpful if you're up against a problem that can't be fixed. It doesn't mean that anger is bad or wrong. It means that acceptance work needs to be done around the anger rather than control work. Now, if you're angry about something that can be fixed, you use the anger to fix it. If you're angry about something that can't be fixed, you need to redirect the anger towards something that can, which is an act of acceptance of the thing that can't, right? So it might be, let's say I'm angry at my partner disagreeing with me. The concept of people disagreeing with me, I can't fix that. People will always disagree with me, and if they don't, it means they're lying, which I prefer even less. So I can't fix the problem of people disagreeing with me, but I can stand up for myself when they do, and I can do acceptance work around what do they ask, what do they stand for? Being able to listen to them, respect them. Ultimately, it's very simple. You have to express it, and you have to express it simply, cleanly, purely, without sugarcoating, without moderating it, without trying to make it more palatable to other people. You can say things like, look, I'm angry. I don't want you to do anything about it. Don't tell me to relax. Don't try and help me. This isn't a problem. I'm actually trying to come to terms with my anger. So just let me be. I'll join you in a minute. Start leading the way. If other people try to shut your anger down, shut them down. Use the anger while it's there, saying, look, don't shame my anger, or words to that effect. So look, I need to be angry right now. It's not your problem. You don't need to fix it. I know you're not comfortable with anger. That's fine. Go hang out in the lunchroom. Come back when I'm all right. Look, the main point I wanted to get across today is that anger is not bad or wrong. It's necessary. It's very helpful. Without it, you'll miss out on all the masculine qualities of life, like determination, assertiveness, breaking new ground, having a passion project, having the strength and courage to be honest when it counts. Anger's there to provide the power you need for all of those projects. And a life without that power is a miserable life. One of the things I always talk about is without anger, Hitler would have taken over the world. Hitler was a sociopath and a psychopath. He could have easily done what he was done without being angry. Anger isn't the cause of World War II. Anger was a solution to it. The other countries got angry enough to shut him down. If you don't let yourself get angry, terrible shit's going to happen in the world and you're just going to sit back and watch. Don't be that guy, right?